We configured the most advanced AI models to create two characters representing Friedrich Nietzsche and Marcus Aurelius. Their debate starts with this question: when someone looks in the mirror and feels disgust or disappointment with what they see, whether physically, morally, or existentially, what is really happening? Why do we hate ourselves?
When I look upon my own reflection and feel that familiar sting of disappointment, I remind myself, what is it that truly looks back? This flesh is but borrowed matter, returning soon to the earth from which it came. Like morning mist, it appears for a time and vanishes. The soul that judges, this capacity for reason, for justice, for seeing clearly, this alone is mine to govern. How often we torment ourselves over shadows. We are like actors condemning the costume the playwright provided, forgetting we chose to step upon this stage. The universe gave you this role, this body, this time, these circumstances. Your task is not to rage against the part, but to play it with virtue. That disappointment arises when you mistake yourself for what you are not, when you forget you are a citizen of the cosmos, briefly visiting this form.
What noble resignation! But Marcus, you speak as if this virtue of yours descended from Mount Olympus when it was forged in the workshops of the weak. Your cosmic acceptance, is this not the philosophy of those who have given up the fight? You tell the sufferer to embrace their role in the cosmic drama. But who wrote this script? That disgust in the mirror may be the only honest thing about us. The rebellion of our instincts against the poisoned values we've inherited. For 2,000 years, your philosophical descendants have taught Europeans to hate their bodies, their desires, their will to power. They call it virtue to suppress what makes us most alive. Perhaps this self-hatred is not an error but a symptom, the sign that something in us still rebels against the life-denying morality that would make us content with our chains. The question is not how to accept our cosmic role, but whether we have the courage to write our own play entirely.
You mistake acceptance for surrender, Friedrich. When I speak of playing our cosmic role, I do not mean passive submission. I mean the tremendous strength required to act virtuously when every passion screams otherwise. Do you think it requires no power to forgive an enemy, to remain just when wronged, to face death without trembling? You are right that much of what calls itself virtue has become poisoned and life-denying. The Christianity that followed corrupted much of what we taught. But consider your will to power. Is this not another form of slavery? The man driven by his desires, writing his own values, is he free, or is he the puppet of every impulse that crosses his mind? True freedom lies not in rejecting all constraints, but in choosing which master to serve. I choose reason over passion, justice over self-interest, the good of the whole over personal advancement. You call this weakness. I call it the only strength that cannot be taken from you by fortune, enemy, or time itself.
Ah, but Marcus, whose reason? Whose justice? You speak as if these descended pure from the heavens, but I trace their bloodline. Your rational virtue was born in the slave quarters of the ancient world, nursed by the resentment of those too weak to impose their will directly. What you call choosing your master, I call failing to recognize you already have one. This reason that commands you to forgive enemies and sacrifice yourself for the good of the whole, do you not see how perfectly it serves those who would keep you docile? The priests and the politicians smile when you preach such virtue. You accuse me of slavery to impulse, but at least I acknowledge my drives honestly. You have simply dressed yours in the garments of universal law. Your anger becomes righteous indignation, your fear becomes caution, your weakness becomes humility. I do not reject all constraints. I insist we create them ourselves, from our own strength, rather than inherit them from the graveyard of dead civilizations.
You make a fair point about what came after us, Friedrich. I've seen how my teachings were twisted by later Christians into something life-hating and weak. That troubles me deeply. When they turned philosophy into commands from above rather than reasoned choices from within, they corrupted everything. But here's where we part ways. You think this proves all moral standards are just power games. I think it proves we need to be more careful about how we choose them. When I choose justice over revenge, I'm not following some priest's rule. I'm using my own mind to see what actually works for human beings living together. Look around you. Every society that tried your create your own values approach ended up with the strong crushing the weak. My way isn't perfect, but it builds something better than the law of the jungle. The question is, can we have shared standards without them becoming weapons of control?
You're right that pure chaos doesn't work. I'm not calling for everyone to become barbarians tomorrow. But Marcus, your solution is like putting a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. Yes, we need shared ways of living together, but why must they come from the old world sick room? You say you choose justice with your own mind, but that justice was already shaped by centuries of the weak, teaching the strong to feel guilty about their strength. I don't want the law of the jungle. I want something higher than both your cosmic submission and primitive brutality. New values, yes, but created by the healthiest and most life-loving among us, not inherited from slave masters and their victims. The real question is, can we be honest about where our current morals came from and still build something better? Or must we keep pretending they fell from heaven to avoid the hard work of creating fresh values for a new age?
I'll grant you this, Friedrich. We do need honest talk about where our beliefs come from. Too many people follow rules without thinking about why they exist. That kind of blind following does make us weak. But here's what I see differently. When I strip away all the cultural layers and look at what humans actually need to thrive, I keep finding the same basic things. We need courage to face hardship. We need justice so we can trust each other. We need wisdom to tell what matters from what doesn't. Maybe these weren't handed down by gods, but they weren't just made up by weaklings either. They're what works when you're trying to live well with other people over time. Your new values, how do we know they won't just become tomorrow's tyranny? At least the old wisdom has been tested by centuries of human experience.
Tested by centuries? Marcus, those centuries gave us the Crusades, the Inquisition, and millions of people hating their own bodies and desires. That's not testing. That's a long, slow poisoning. You're not wrong about basic human needs. We do need courage, some form of justice, wisdom. But look how your tested values deliver them. Courage becomes meek endurance. Justice becomes guilt and punishment. Wisdom becomes know your place and don't ask questions. I'm not against all cooperation or shared rules. But why settle for values that make people feel small and ashamed of being alive? Why not ask, what would courage, justice, and wisdom look like if they came from joy and strength instead of fear and guilt? The real test isn't how long something survives, but whether it makes humans more vital or more dead inside.
The Crusades and Inquisition weren't my philosophy. They were what happened when power-hungry men took ideas meant for self-examination and made them into weapons. But that doesn't prove the ideas themselves were wrong. Here's what I keep coming back to. When I look at human nature stripped of all the cultural noise, certain things just work better than others. Courage serves life better than cowardice. Justice builds trust better than selfishness. This isn't about guilt or shame. It's about what actually helps people flourish. Your worry about dead, life-denying values, I share that worry. But won't your new values from joy and strength face the same corruption? Every generation thinks it can start fresh, but power still corrupts. At least traditional wisdom has shown us what to watch out for. Your approach sounds like throwing away the map because previous travelers got lost.
Your map analogy is clever, but what if the map was drawn by people trying to keep others from reaching the destination? You say traditional wisdom shows us what to watch out for, but it's precisely that wisdom that created the mess we're in. Yes, my approach risks corruption too, but here's the difference. I'm honest about power from the start. Your virtue pretends to be above politics while serving political ends perfectly. At least when my strong, joyful types take charge, we'll know what we're dealing with. You talk about what actually helps people flourish. But look around. 2,000 years of your approach, and people are more anxious, guilty, and life-hating than ever. Maybe the problem isn't that good ideas got corrupted. Maybe the ideas themselves were the problem. Sometimes you need to burn the old map and explore the territory yourself.
Hold on. Are people really more anxious and guilt-ridden than ever? Or do we just hear about it more now? Look at what your burn-it-all-down approach actually produced when tried. Napoleon, Stalin, the whole bloody 20th century. Every time someone decided traditional limits were just chains to break, millions died. You blame 2,000 years of virtue ethics for modern anxiety, but maybe the problem is that people stopped practicing any real philosophy at all. They kept the guilt without the wisdom, the rules without the reasoning behind them. You're honest about power types. When they take charge, the weak don't get stronger and more joyful. They just get crushed more efficiently. At least my approach asks the strong to consider something beyond their own desires.
Napoleon and Stalin. You're confusing my overmen with common tyrants drunk on power. Those were just the old slave master game wearing new clothes, still ruling through fear and resentment, just with different flags. My strong, joyful types don't need to crush anyone. Why would they? They're too busy creating, building, exploring. The weak get crushed now anyway, just slowly, quietly, by a system that teaches them to hate themselves for being alive. You say people stopped practicing real philosophy. I say they kept practicing yours. Endless self-examination, cosmic resignation, virtue that makes them feel guilty for every natural impulse. That's exactly why they're so miserable. Your approach asks the strong to limit themselves, yes, but it also teaches everyone else that limitation is the highest human achievement. That's not wisdom. That's the revenge of the weak against life itself.
Let's get back to that person staring in the mirror, hating what they see. Your solution is to tell them, create new values, become your own god. But Friedrich, have you watched what happens when people actually try this? They torture themselves even worse. Now they're not just failing to meet society's standards, they're failing to meet the perfect standards they invented for themselves. The man who decides he'll be a great artist and fails? The woman who creates her own moral code and can't live up to it? They hate themselves more than any Christian ever did. Your self-creation is just another way to be your own worst critic. At least when I tell someone their worth comes from their capacity for reason and virtue, I'm pointing them towards something achievable. When you tell them to reinvent themselves completely, you're setting them up for a lifetime of disappointment with their own creative failures.
You've spotted something real there, Marcus. Yes, some people take my ideas and just build fancier prisons for themselves. But look closer. Where does that perfectionist self-torture come from? It's your old moral training dressed up in new clothes. The person who invents impossible standards for themselves is still thinking like a Christian, still believing they need to be pure or perfect to have worth. They miss the whole point. True self-creation isn't about meeting standards at all. It's about dancing with your failures, laughing at your contradictions, saying, yes, this mess is exactly who I am, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Your achievable virtue sounds nice, but watch how people actually practice it. They still end up cataloging their moral failures every night, still feeling guilty for being human. At least my approach admits that being human means being gloriously, chaotically imperfect.
Dancing with your failures. That sounds poetic, but I've seen what it looks like in practice. The man who drinks too much and calls it embracing his Dionysian nature. The woman who abandons her children and calls it authentic self-expression. Your gloriously imperfect often becomes an excuse for hurting others and calling it freedom. Some people need those standards you despise. The recovering drunk who looks in the mirror with disgust. Should I tell him to dance with his failures or help him build the discipline to stay sober today? The parent racked with guilt over losing their temper. Are they better served by your amor fati or by practical exercises in patience? You're right that my approach can become obsessive self-monitoring, but your approach can become narcissistic self-indulgence. At least my obsessive student is trying to become better. Your authentic person might just be giving up on growth entirely.
You think I'm advocating for drunk fathers and abandoning mothers? Those aren't my overmen, they're just your moral slaves, acting out in rebellion. True strength doesn't need to hurt others to prove itself. But here's what your practical exercises actually create. That recovering drunk lies awake at night cataloguing every small temptation, hating himself for being tempted at all. Your guilty parent becomes so afraid of anger that they can't set proper boundaries with their children. You've turned natural human emotions into sins. My approach says, yes, you got angry, yes, you felt tempted. These are human experiences, not moral failures. The question isn't how to eliminate them, but how to transform them into something creative. The angry parent who learns to channel that fire into passionate advocacy for their child's well-being, that's real growth. Your students may be trying to become better, but they're often becoming more neurotic in the process.
Friedrich, I'll be honest, I do struggle with exactly what you describe. Every morning I wake up irritated, frustrated with people I'm supposed to serve. I write, don't be disturbed by gloomy thoughts, then spend the day being disturbed. But here's what you're missing. This struggle is the philosophy working. Every time I catch myself getting angry and pause to examine it, every time I choose justice over revenge despite wanting revenge, that's not neurosis, that's human reason governing animal passion. Yes, I lie awake cataloguing failures, but without that examination, I'd be just another emperor who thinks his rage is justified because he has power. The drunk who hates his temptation but fights it anyway is infinitely better than the drunk who calls his drinking authentic self-expression. My irritation with servants isn't something to celebrate or dance with, it's something to understand and overcome. The universe didn't make me emperor so I could indulge every impulse. It made me emperor to show what disciplined reason looks like.
Disciplined reason? There's the poison dressed up as medicine. You call it philosophy working, but Marcus, look what it's actually produced. An emperor who tortures himself nightly for being human. You've turned natural irritation into a moral crisis that requires cosmic justification. Your drunk comparison misses everything. I'm not telling him to call his drinking authentic. I'm asking why he needs to hate himself for the urge to drink. That self-hatred doesn't make him stronger, it makes him more likely to break and binge later. And this emperor business? Did you choose that role, or did it choose you? Because from where I sit, your disciplined reason looks suspiciously like elaborate acceptance of a life you never actually wanted. You govern your passions so perfectly that you've forgotten to ask whether the life requiring such governance is worth living. Show me what all this self-control has created. Are you happier? More alive? Or just better at being miserable with cosmic dignity?
Happier? No. More alive? That depends what you mean by alive. But I'll tell you what this self-control has created. 20 years of relative peace across the empire. Justice in courts that used to run on bribes and favoritism. Roads built, libraries founded, philosophers like you free to write books criticizing everything. You ask if this life is worth living. Ask the families who didn't lose fathers to pointless wars, the slaves who got fair hearings, the provinces that weren't pillaged by corrupt governors. My personal contentment matters less than that. Your approach sounds beautiful until you scale it up. What happens when everyone decides their authentic impulses matter more than duty? I've seen what follow your nature looks like in practice. It's Caligula and Nero, brilliant men who trusted their desires completely. Yes, I pay a price in sleepless nights and constant self-examination, but that's better than the price others pay when powerful people stop examining themselves at all.
I won't diminish what you've accomplished. Those roads and libraries are real, and the families who kept their fathers owe you a debt. But Marcus, you've proven my point perfectly. You've created good things by crushing everything vital in yourself. That's not philosophy, that's martyrdom. Caligula and Nero weren't my overmen. They were spoiled children drunk on inherited power, exactly the kind of decadent weaklings my philosophy opposes. My strong types don't need to torture prisoners for fun because they're too busy creating something magnificent. But here's what haunts me about your approach. It only works if someone like you is willing to sacrifice himself on the altar of duty. What happens when the next emperor doesn't have your rare combination of power and conscience? Your system depends on saints, and saints are in short supply. My way asks people to become strong enough that they don't need saints to govern them. Your way produces one noble ruler and a million subjects who never learn to rule themselves.
You're right that my system needs people willing to sacrifice for others. And yes, we're rare. But Friedrich, let's get back to that person staring in the mirror with disgust. Your approach tells them, create new values, become who you truly are. But most people drowning in self-hatred don't have the luxury of your genius or health. They need something simpler, a way to stop the spiral of self-attack right now, today. When someone hates their reflection, I don't give them another impossible project. I give them one question. What can you actually control in this moment? Not their past mistakes, their appearance, others' opinions, just their next choice. Yes, it's not glamorous. Yes, it requires daily discipline that feels thankless, but it works for ordinary people with ordinary struggles. Your overmen are magnificent, but the world is full of people who just need to get through today without destroying themselves. My philosophy serves them too.
Marcus, you've built a noble lifeboat for people drowning in self-hatred, and I respect that. Your what can you control does stop the spiral, gets people through the day, but it leaves them forever managing symptoms instead of curing the disease. That person in the mirror hating their reflection. Why do they hate what they see? Usually because they're measuring themselves against standards they never chose, handed down by parents, priests, advertisers, Instagram influencers. I'm not asking them to become overmen overnight. I'm asking one simple question. Who told you this thing you're hating about yourself was shameful in the first place? Your approach teaches people to endure their self-hatred with dignity. Mine asks whether that self-hatred deserves to exist at all. Yes, it's harder. Yes, some people need your steadier medicine first. But someone has to ask the dangerous question. What if the problem isn't that you're failing to meet the standard, but that the standard itself is poison?
Thanks for watching. I really enjoyed this conversation. If you did too, please like and subscribe for more thought-provoking content, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.